Hi, I'm Lara Matosian, host of the Adjacent Possible podcast. The Adjacent Possible is a kind of shadow future, hovering on the edges of the present state of things, a map of all the ways in which the present can reinvent itself. This podcast is all about probing what's possible, what's probable, and what's preferable in education. Join us as we explore how we can overhaul our current pedagogical systems, solve global grand challenges, and bring about civilization-level change. The podcast is held in partnership with Area 2071, which is part of the Dubai Future Foundation. The Adjacent Possible podcast is also supported by Awecademy, a global educational organization that offers future-focused and wisdom-based education to high school learners with the aim of preparing them for a world of automation, artificial intelligence, and accelerating change. Our guests today are Rohan Roberts and Raya Bidshahri. Welcome to the Adjacent Possible podcast. You join me, your host, Lara Matosian, and our guests, founders of Awecademy, Raya Bidshahri, and Rohan Roberts. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
It's great to have you. So let's start with STEAM. What is STEAM?
So, for the longest time, schools around the world focused on STEM education: science, technology, engineering, and maths. And this goes back to the 1990s when American schools were lagging behind the rest of the developed world in science and maths. And so the American government funded the science and technology and math subjects to the tune of millions of dollars in an effort to raise performance and raise grades. But after 20 years, we discovered that American students were still lagging behind the rest of the developed world. And in the meanwhile, we made tremendous progress in the field of neuroscience. Brain mapping and brain scanning technologies are exponential technologies, and we're learning far more about the brain than ever before. And everything we learned from neuroscience was telling us that if we want to develop creative, innovative students, then we've got to integrate strategies from the arts in the teaching of science, technology, engineering, and maths. So the A in STEAM stands for the arts. And I stress the because the refers to not just fine arts, but all aspects of arts, including film, dance, poetry, music, dance, and so on.
The performing arts, in addition to the visual arts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So for the longest time, STEM education by itself missed the development of critical, higher-ordered skills that are very important in the future of work. So we're heading towards what's called the imagination age, which is an era wherein higher-order thinking skills such as creativity and imagination become the primary creators of value in our world and in our economy. It's also known as the creative economy. So competencies such as creativity, innovation, divergent thinking, creative problem solving are exceptionally important. And with STEAM education, where you combine the arts, you're also developing those skills alongside the more technical kind of problem solving and skills that you get from mathematics and engineering.
Yeah, and an excellent example is the iPhone. When the iPhone came out in 2007, 2008, it took everyone by surprise. It was an astonishing piece of science and technology. But it wasn't just a product of science and tech. It was also a product of art and design and business and entrepreneurship. So it was all these 6 elements: science and tech, business and entrepreneurship, art and design, that came together to create this amazing, astonishing piece of technology that took the world by storm.
Well, let's talk about something else that I feel is going to take the world by storm in its own right. Let's talk a little bit about Awecademy and how that brings STEAM.
Absolutely. So Awecademy, essentially, at its core, has interdisciplinary curriculum. So we don't compartmentalize our curriculum and topics into boxes of subjects like physics, math, chemistry, or even economics. Instead, we focus on teaching interdisciplinary themes. These include things like AI ethics, moonshot thinking, global challenges, female empowerment, intelligent optimism, and much more. So at its very core, it combines the sciences along with the humanities and focuses on creating a cross-curricular curriculum from its foundation. Because if you look at traditional education, what we've done is we've, at a very basic level, split things into subjects. So if you look at all these mainstream curriculum providers like A-levels, IB or CBSE, they're all at a fundamental level compartmentalized into different subjects,
Yes.
which is a basic kind of error in the way we've been doing things. So instead of building on top of that, what we've done is throw that away and actually design curriculum from scratch that's focusing on multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary themes, including STEAM.
And the reason this is important is because we know from neuroscience that if we want innovative, creative students, we've got to take an interdisciplinary approach, cross-curricular approach to problem solving. And that means getting rid of teaching subjects in baskets, science in the science basket, English in the English basket, and so on. Now, the reason there is so much resistance from conventional schools and the traditional education system is because this immediately puts teachers out of their comfort zone. Teachers have spent their entire careers teaching a subject and focusing on imparting information. Now, kids have information in the palm of their hands. They have the internet and their smartphones, and they can access facts and information instantly. So this means teachers will need to adapt and retrain and upskill and encourage interdisciplinary thinking among their students.
And linked very closely to Awecademy is its sister organization, SciFest Dubai. SciFest Dubai also promotes STEAM education. How does SciFest Dubai do that differently than Awecademy does?
So, Awecademy is an online platform with face-to-face workshops. SciFest Dubai is a citywide celebration of science through the arts, through drama, music, performance, dance, poetry, science fiction writing, debates, and traditional hardcore STEM science workshops. We had our first science festival in Dubai in 2014. And since then, it's been an annual event open to the youth and adults from around the city. And it's been a tremendous success. We've had over 50,000 cumulative audience over the years, 300 to 350 different events in various venues around the city. And Dr. Abdullah Al-Karam, who is the Director General of the KHDA, has been our chief guest every year since 2014 and a tremendous supporter of what we do.
And SciFest is a perfect example of how STEAM is not just relevant in the classroom, but also when it comes to engaging the general public at large. If you look at advancements in science and technology, more often than not, they kind of happen within the vacuum of the research labs or the big data technology companies that are doing the R&D. Very little time from the general public is spent actually engaging with the implications of these advancements on the way we live and on the way we work. So the arts is an excellent excuse to take science and make it accessible and exciting to people who would normally not be interested in science. While you have a large portion of the population that may not necessarily go and listen to a science debate or a science talk, they're far more likely to go and watch a fashion show or participate in an art exhibition or actually see a poetry challenge. The reality is that the arts have such a powerful influence on pop culture, on the way we think and interact with the world around us, and using them as a platform to promote science can be a powerful way to engage the general public.
Yeah, in some ways we are using the arts to seduce people into the sciences. Because science has an image problem. A lot of people are intimidated by science. They once they leave high school, they want to have nothing to do with science primarily because of the way it was taught in high school. It was taught as a bunch of facts and figures, equations, definitions to be memorized, and as soon as you're done with high school, you forget about science. So we wanted to change that and get everyone excited about science, because in the 21st century, it's important for all of us to be scientifically literate. And so a couple of examples of how we do things differently at SciFest. For instance, we had a science-themed drama based on the life of Isaac Newton's life, and we had astronomy-themed art exhibitions. and we had science-themed fashion shows. So this brought in students and individuals who may not necessarily have been interested in science, but because the SciFest had an arts-themed focus, they too were involved in the running of the festival.
And this was very successful. I remember that there were examples of students, young and slightly older, who had unforgettable experiences in their participation in the festival.
Definitely. I think it was empowering for both the artists and the scientists. I mean, till this day, we get approached by students who participated maybe in the art side of things, like the fashion show or the exhibition, and they talk about how the SciFest Dubai was one of the few platforms that encouraged the arts as well as a potential career path, as something that is perfectly viable and a totally legitimate way of contributing to society. And because we elevated both of those sides that are often seen as too binary, they're seen as two opposites, and we integrated it, I think it was a very empowering experience for a lot of young people.
Yeah, absolutely. For instance, if you talk about poetry, most people are aware of the Byrons and Shelley, the Keats and the Wordsworths, but there is a lot of science-themed poetry out there as well. So we'd have performance poetry based on science themes, like about astronomy, the stars, the universe, about the human brain. There is poetry in science. Every
Yes.
time you look up at the night sky and contemplate the vastness of the cosmos, you feel a poetic sense of the numinous, and that's what we were looking to encourage through the festival.
And we tried to bring this sort of love and curiosity into the mainstream, not just with students, but with grown-ups too, to spark that curiosity. We have the Café Scientifique initiative. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so established in 2013, Café Scientifique was an initiative that inspired people to talk about science and technology in an informal setting or over a cup of coffee as we talk about it. So think about it. When was the last time you had a very casual discussion, intellectual discussion about advancements in science with your friend outside a professional or academic setting? Now, for a lot of people, this is that they don't have these conversations enough. And we wanted to change that. We wanted to show that science wasn't just something you did in the lab or in the lecture hall. It was also something that you could do on a day-to-day basis, because these advancements affect every aspect of our lives. So these events were hosted about once a month. They brought together young professionals all the way to adults, sometimes younger folks as well. And they were structured so we started with an introductory talk by a guest speaker, then moved on to networking and discussions, which was the main focus, was for people to meet each other and have intellectually stimulating conversations. And then we had an open mic session where people could share with everyone in the room. And each month we had a different theme as well. So we covered themes such as the extinction, neuroscience, biotechnology, astronomy and the universe, the future of work, the future of education, all very exciting, cutting-edge topics that we all need to be engaging with.
Again, the underlying reason for that is that it is our belief that everybody today should be scientifically literate, and we wanted to bring together the science nerds and the science novices to engage in conversations. In other words, take science out of the classrooms, out of the laboratories, and into a social setting like a cafe, where we talk about some of the repercussions of and implications of science and technology today. We live in an age of exponential technologies. Some of these technologies in the field of artificial intelligence and drones, 3D printing will have tremendous ramifications on the future of human society. And it's important for all of us to contribute to that conversation. And Café Scientifique is an excellent social gathering where people can exchange views and formulate their opinions.
And Café Scientifique has been going from strength to strength over the years, and that's actually manifested in its new home in Area 2071, where the future accelerators are in Emirates Towers. Tell us a little bit about why that is such an excellent fit.
Yeah, so Area 2071 is an initiative of the Dubai Future Foundation and the UAE Prime Minister's office. And the goal is to create an ecosystem and incubator space to bring together government entities, startups, corporations, and other innovators and artists in order to create an exciting vision for the future of the United Arab Emirates and the future of humanity at large. So it's an incredible ecosystem to be a part of, and it's also a stunning venue. You know, we're in it right now. It's very futuristic, very innovative. The general public loves being here, and it's just an excellent validation of our mission and vision.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, Dubai is such a futuristic city, and it's important that we have such a social community where we talk about technology, the future, the implications of science, and in some ways we were influenced by the World Science Festival that happens in New York, and Raya has worked with the team there when she was in New York. And also, we were influenced by John Brockman's The Edge, which brings together intellectuals from the field of science and the arts to talk about the implications of some of these technologies and developments.
And the last Café Scientifique Dubai event was an epitome of STEAM, a real celebration of it. It was about Burning Man. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So Burning Man is where do you start, right? So the best way to describe Burning Man is an event in the Nevada desert where 70,000 people show up and create incredible works of art. In other words, it's an experiment in community living with art as the focus. And it's been referred to as the Olympics of art. And the kind of art installations you see there are absolutely astonishing, and the whole event is an excellent example of what intelligent, creative, generous people can do when you give them an open landscape. It's a barren desert. There is no electricity. There's no Wi-Fi, no mobile phone coverage, no convenience stores. People come there in the middle of this desert, extremely hot during the day, very cold at night, and they create extraordinary works of art that will leave you gasping in awe and wonder.
Yeah, what makes Burning Man special is also the 10 principles that it operates on, and all regional burns around the world operate on. They include gifting, radical expression, radical inclusion, immediacy, and many more. And for me, the principles themselves are also an example of STEAM, because if you remember the A in STEAM, the arts also includes the humanities. So when we think about how do we want to create future societies, what values, principles, and morals do we want to integrate in future societies, I think the 10 principles are an excellent case study of the kind of future societies we want to create. In fact, in a recent boot camp that we did, Awecademy boot camp we did with youth, we used Burning Man as a case study of what future cities could look like, what those morals could look like, and that served as an inspiration for a follow-up activity where the students then work together to come up with their own 10 set of principles for a potential city on Mars.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, if you look at Elon Musk's sort of blueprint for his city on Mars, it looks remarkably like the city planning that we see at Burning Man, Black Rock City, where Burning Man takes place. But just to highlight the connection between Burning Man and innovation, not many people are aware that Google's first CEO, Eric Schmidt, was hired by Larry Page and Sergey Brin precisely because of the 50 candidates they had shortlisted. Only Eric Schmidt had been to Burning Man before. So they took him to Burning Man in 2002, 2003, and they observed how he reacted in that VUCA world. It's volatile, uncertain, chaotic, complex, and ambiguous. And in the end, they realized he was the man for them. And in the end, Eric Schmidt became the most successful CEO in the history of human society. So you have half of Silicon Valley out there in the desert, building and making extraordinary works of art,
including Elon Musk.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so Elon Musk has his mutant vehicle. So you have mutant vehicles where they're cars like you've never seen them before. So they've been amped up into art cars. They are like, you can see a pirate ship driving around, and Elon Musk has this big yacht that's driving around the desert.
Yes.
Yeah, it's absolutely extraordinary to see this massive yacht just sort of sailing in the desert, and it just leaves you flabbergasted. But also, the first Tesla was prototyped at Burning Man in 2002. And Elon Musk got his idea for Solar City during his drive to Burning Man. So the connection between Burning Man, innovation, Silicon Valley, creativity is very powerful.
I'd like to touch a little more on what you said just a little earlier about the arts and STEAM helping to shape the future of our society. Tell us more a little about that.
Yeah, well, if you look at the arts, I mean, one of the fundamental reasons we create art is for self-expression, which is a good reason. But it's not the only reason. A lot of works of art often have powerful missions imbued into them. And in fact, many modern-day artists are looking at technology and science and exploring how they impact our human psyche and the way we interact with each other. And this is really, really impactful because, I can tell you this is what could go wrong, or these are the benefits and positive applications, or I can show you that through an interactive, inspiring, immersive art piece. And that effect that artists have on society is also very difficult to quantify and underestimated. It's very easy to see the kind of value a physical product would create in terms of how much it sells and how much traction it gets on social media. But the impact of a work on art and the way it influences your vision for the future and the decisions that you make is very difficult to quantify. So I think we often tend to underestimate it.
Yeah, and also we live in an interesting time. We live in a world where AI is becoming ubiquitous. Kevin Kelly Kevin Kelly is the founder of Wired magazine. He points out that everything that can be imbued with AI will be imbued with AI. Everything that was formerly electrified will now be cognified. And Peter Diamandis, co-founder of Singularity University and serial entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, points out that AI will have a bigger impact on human society and the human condition than did fire and electricity. And so we now live in a world where already in 2019 we have AI that is making art, composing music, driving cars, and so on. Things that we thought were once uniquely human traits are now being exhibited by artificial intelligence. So the question we need to ask ourselves, step back and ask ourselves, is in a world where AI is making art and composing music, what then is the purpose of being human? What do we focus on in high schools? What is the purpose of education? What is the purpose of being human? And Burning Man is an excellent example of this sort of post-AI, post-industrial world where we ask ourselves, what will humans do when AI does all the work, when automation takes over? Well, one possible answer is it will free all of us to be creative in radically new ways. And so Burning Man is this example of a post-AI world. And one day we could all be freed up to be creative in how we spend our time.
Yeah, so adding on to that, I think there are lots of powerful questions to be raised about AI creating art. For instance, who's the real artist here, the AI or the person that programmed the AI? Is the AI truly expressing itself, or is it simply creating visuals as a byproduct of algorithms? Can anything really express itself if it isn't conscious? So I think it's something I encourage people to reflect on, is the implications of artificial intelligence creating art, because it's not as simple as we'd like to think.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why it's important to focus on STEAM and taking an interdisciplinary approach to problem solving is that currently we have AI that can only do single things. We have AI that can only create art or make music or direct air traffic control or find something for you on Google. Whereas humans, what makes us special is we can do all of these things. And so moving forward, we need to educate our kids to be interdisciplinary thinkers and cross-curricular problem solvers, and bring perspectives to a problem from different sources, and that's where the importance of STEAM comes in, and that's what makes the art at Burning Man so extraordinary, because the art pieces there involve input from science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. So an example would be one of my favorite art installations from 2017 was the something called the Tree of Tenere. Essentially, this was a 4 or 5 story high tree, artificially built tree, out there in the middle of the desert, where each of the leaves on the tree was an LED light. And you had serious programmers there programming the lights. You had engineers building the physical structure of the tree. You had the science behind the optics involved and computer technicians and so on. And at night, the tree would come alive in this extraordinary show of light, and there was music and there was dance underneath the tree. And so you see this coming together of music and dance and computation and everything else. Right now, we don't have any AI that can do it single-handedly. You require a human brain to do it, and that's why it's so important to focus on interdisciplinary thinking as we move forward.
I remember the tree of Tenere had thousands and thousands of leaves that actually reacted to sound that was generated by humans. So it was like all the art at Burning Man, interactive. I think the challenge is how to bring the spirit of curiosity and play and exploration out of Black Rock City and into what burners call the default world, which is the world outside of Black Rock City.
Yeah, that's a very good point. For me as an educator, I've been in education 18 years now, and my first thought after I returned from my initial trip to Burning Man was, what are we teaching our kids in school that is even remotely preparing them to be creators of art in the default world? And I came to the conclusion, at the moment, there's nothing we're teaching kids, and there's no way in which we're preparing them to be creators of such extraordinary art.
Yes, and let's for a moment stop to talk a little bit more about this art, because when you say art, a lot of people think, oh, paintings and whatnot. We're talking about larger than life, interactive installations that are feats of engineering. So it's really the STEM that makes the A in the STEAM of Burning Man come to life.
Well, yeah, when you mention larger than life, some of these installations are almost the size of the Statue of Liberty, some of them. They're colossal. And the creativity that goes into it involves not just input from science, but there's lots of engineering there. You'll see huge crane structures, people bringing in their mathematical knowledge and their artistic knowledge. And that's what makes it different from some of the art galleries you visit in, say, New York or London or Berlin. And the difference between the art installations at Burning Man and the rest of the world in your regular art galleries is these art pieces are interactive. They're incomplete unless the audience participates and gets involved. And that's what makes it so exhilarating to be part of these art installations. So one is part of an art installation. One doesn't observe one of the installations there at Burning Man.
And just to add to that, the installations are obviously one of the highlights for a lot of people, but there's other forms of art that happen as well. You obviously have, music, you have poetry, you have dancing, you have even people who are going around doing sketches of each other. So there's so many different forms of arts and creative expression. And I think the key principle that all falls under is radical creative expression. So it's or radical creativity. It's not just about art. It's about how do you express yourself in a world without any boundaries or consequences to your self-expression.
Yes.
And that's something that's very difficult to do in many parts of the default world, where we are either shunned by society or where sometimes there may be regulations around being able to express yourself a certain way. So when all of those is taken away is where we see the beauty of the kind of creativity that you see at Burning Man.
It's a case of the arts going out of its boundaries because it has a role in shaping the future of our society. You would have a person say, why should I be interested in the arts? I want to become an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor. But the arts do have a role. So what is the role of the arts in shaping future societies?
I think what they do is they show us what the future could look like. They inspire us, they motivate us, right? If we just look at your average scientific paper and the way it reports findings, it's just a question of passing that information. But where the artist comes in is, okay, how do I take this finding and show people the beauty and wonder and poetry associated with it? How do I take it and show them what the implications of it is? And if you look at how much of our perceptions of ourselves and the world at large is shaped by the movies we watch, the music we listen to. I mean, or the TV shows we watch, we're always engaging with different forms of arts and their artists on a daily basis. But what we're trying to say is, okay, let's be conscious about the mission and the kind of messages that we communicate through the arts, and have it actually take forward the kind of values and principles that we would like to see more in our society.
I think being an educator in Dubai, the Dubai private school governing body, the KHDA, has made a step in the right direction by focusing on STEAM in high schools and moving beyond STEM. So they took that decision 3 or 4 years ago, and since then schools have been expected to make that transition from focusing on STEM, just pure STEM, to STEAM. So that's a great move, a step in the right direction. But at the same time, we also need to upskill and train and explain to teachers the reason for this transition. And in my experience, a lot of teachers are still not there yet. They still can't clearly articulate why we're focusing on STEAM. And there's a lot of misconception out there as well about what STEAM is. Very often, if you're asked to see an example of a STEAM lesson, you're shown some Lego kits or a few robots wandering about. And that's not quite what STEAM is. So just to give a concrete example of the difference between a traditional STEM lesson and a STEAM lesson. Imagine you were teaching a middle school science lesson and the focus was on astronomy. Now, a traditional STEM lesson, you would either tell students about, say, the planets, or give them a textbook with information about the planets, and the students would memorize all that information. And at the end of it, you would quiz all 30 students, and they would either do a multiple choice question or they would complete a test. And you would get the same answer from all 30 students. So that's a traditional STEM lesson where there is zero room for creativity. You're expected to have one correct answer, and all 30 students are expected to have that same correct answer. Now imagine you were doing that same lesson, but you had a STEAM focus. So now, an example of teaching, say, astronomy or teaching kids about the planet would be to say, okay, 30 students, let's divide you into 6 groups. Each group is assigned a different planet. So group 1, your Mercury, group 2, your Mars, group 3, your Jupiter, and so on. And another way of doing it is to say to each of these groups is, okay, here's some factual information about Jupiter and Mercury. Read it, understand it, assimilate it, and then imagine there was a living organism or a sentient creature or a living creature alive on your planet. Based on the information you read about your planet, what would that creature look like, and justify your answer? So say the group that got Jupiter would say, well, if they'd really understood the factual information about Jupiter, would say, well, Jupiter has no land. It's a gaseous planet. So whatever creature that would survive on Jupiter would have to be able to fly. And any creature that lives on Jupiter would have to have some sort of shielding to protect itself from the intense radiation. And then the kids who've been given Venus would say, well, Venus is extremely hot, so whatever creature that lives on Venus would have to be able to protect itself from intense temperatures and intense pressures, and would also be able to breathe in carbon dioxide, because we know Venus has a lot of carbon dioxide. So this is just an example of how there is no one correct answer, but you're now encouraging kids to be critical thinkers and to sort of deep dive into the factual information. And so at the end, you have different answers, and each group would have a different way of responding, but you're encouraging a deeper engagement with the content and not just blind repetition of facts.
Yes, and this brings us to science fiction and how many things were predicted in science fiction, which is an art, just as they are predicted in the mathematics. A lot of what authors wrote about some decades ago are actually with us today.
Yeah. So science fiction author Isaac Asimov has pointed out that modern science fiction is the only genre and only form of literature that forces us to constantly face the changes that are ahead of us. So, it's one thing to report on the latest technologies, but another to actually look at the implications of them. For instance, how will artificial intelligence affect our relationships? What would happen if we encountered alien life? Like, how will social media affect privacy? Now, we can wait for these things to happen and then find out, or we can actually use the power of science fiction and go on these journeys and narratives and try to actually create a scenario in fiction wherein these things happen and see how humans would react. And that's, I think, the power of science fiction. And one thing to keep in mind is the difference between science fiction and fantasy. Now, so what makes science fiction different is that everything that happens in that genre and in that fictional world is still within the boundaries of the science, the laws of science and the laws of physics at large. In contrast, everything that a lot of stuff that happens in the fantasy genre can often be outside of that realm of science and the physical laws of the universe.
Yeah, and it's no coincidence that some of the most inspiring entrepreneurs of our time, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Sergey Brin, Richard Branson, are all huge fans of science fiction, and they're all obsessed with space because there's something about science fiction that allows the mind to be opened and allows you to zoom out and see the big picture and see the big possibilities out there. Most of us, we're trapped on this little blue rock, but these readers of science fiction, science fiction allows for the imagination to be expanded in incredible ways. And so think of something like Star Trek, which came out in the 1960s. And many of the technologies that seemed ludicrous back then are now evident in our daily lives. Things like the mobile phone and the 3D printers, the tablet devices. These were out and out science fiction back then, but today they're science facts. So what we need are more science fiction authors and readers of science fiction to imagine, to contemplate the future, and then have the engineers go out there and build it and make it happen.
And what we need more of is more STEAM in our school curricula. How can schools bring more STEAM into their curriculum?
Well, I think at a fundamental level, I mean, one way is to actually start mandating it as, cross-curricular links, and what KHJ has done is great. But I think in the long term, at a fundamental level, we have to completely overhaul traditional education models if we're going to integrate STEAM and interdisciplinary learning at large. Because as we discussed earlier, at a fundamental level, we're currently teaching science as science, and we're teaching it separately as biology, physics, and chemistry, and then we're teaching economics separately and media studies separately, and then maybe making some cross-curricular links in addition to that. That's just an absolutely ineffective and inefficient way of doing that, because the real reality is that reality isn't compartmentalized into subjects. If you look at the world around you, the world around you is interdisciplinary. Even if you look at global challenges around you, whether it be climate change or wealth inequality, no single subject can accurately encapsulate or solve these challenges, but a collection of disciplines working together can. So I think one of the most effective ways is to just break down the boundaries between the subjects and instead start focusing on teaching interdisciplinary themes, or even inspiring young minds to work on global challenges. So what if instead of memorizing facts all day, students came in and worked on a local or global challenge? Let's say it's climate change, right? You have to look at the science behind what's causing it and the geology. You have to look at maybe the media aspect of how you communicate it to the general public. At a policy level, what are some of the regulations you need to look at that will influence climate change? And you could go on and on and on. And I think that would give a much more holistic and a real-life perspective on the issues that matter the most.
Yeah, we were hanging out with Mark Prensky, who's one of my favorite educational writers and keynote speakers, and we did a podcast with him a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things he mentioned was science fiction helped him become a big picture thinker. And in his book, The World Needs a New Curriculum, he points out, or he rather suggests, that instead of focusing on subjects and teaching subjects in the subject basket, instead we get rid of the mess, as he calls it, and the mess stands for maths, English, science, social studies, and instead encourage students from the moment they come to school to focus on solving problems in the real world. So just stop for a minute and imagine how amazing that would be if from the moment a child entered a school campus, they found other like-minded students who are excited about solving the same problem in their community, and all their hours spent in a school campus was spent actually solving problems. And then they would go to, say, the science teacher if they had a doubt in science, or the maths teacher or the English teacher, but they would include the artists, they would include the scientists, they would include the mathematicians, and all of them would work collaboratively on solving problems in the real world.
As we actually do in the real world.
Exactly. So I'm truly hoping there are some inspiring principals out there or school senior leaders out there who will take on board Mark Prensky's suggestion and make it happen. I know we can't have wholesale change instantaneously, but we can make small-scale change gradually.
And that's why Mark Prensky offers it as an opt-in option to make the transition easier, because I think once we see that a structure like that is far more effective than the status quo, then I think that a lot more people will want to opt in.
Oh, absolutely.
Definitely.
And kids would be so excited about school, coming to school. I mean, come on, let's not kid ourselves. Many students today are jaded. They feel uninspired at school. It's all about the exams, teaching to the curriculum, completing the syllabus, and so on. But once we make this switch, solving problems in the real world, school would be a place of excitement and have a practical impact. And kids would know that what they're doing isn't a waste of time. It isn't just something they do to pass an exam.
And I have to say that this is something that's not coming from just from adult educators. I know from the workshops that Awecademy took through the Science Festival in 2018 into schools, even with students as young as 10 years old, we had fantastic feedback from those young students. Tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, in addition to the online program, we do a lot of workshops and boot camps and even summer camps now with students from middle school all the way up to high school. And we covered, it's the interdisciplinary, but we also cover really relevant and transformative topics such as, STEAM, but also moonshot thinking, finding your massive transformative purpose, sustainable development goals, the impact of exponential technologies, and much more. And one of the top feedback we get is students coming up to us and saying, why can't this be school every day? Why can't we learn stuff like this at school every day? Just a few weekends ago after a boot camp, one of the students said it was the best learning experience of their lives, and they couldn't believe that they went their whole lives before they were exposed to such topics. And just today I was speaking to a group of parents. Many of them would come running after me saying, how do we sign up? Like, how do we get our students to do more of this? So there's definitely a real hunger for change and for transformation in the education space. I think what's lacking is from a leadership level, someone being proactive enough and bold enough to do things differently.
Yes, to disrupt. So before we close our conversation, I would like to ask you to talk to us a little more about STEAM in relation to what it means to be a Renaissance man or woman, for that matter.
Well, yeah, the term Renaissance man / woman goes back to the Renaissance days, when you would have scholars who were good at art, and someone like Da Vinci was amazing at art. He was a sculptor. He was a military man. He was a mathematician. And so back then, it was slightly easier to have substantial knowledge about various fields. But in today's world, we tend to focus on specializing, and so you have people who are narrow specialists, and that was okay in the 20th century. But now, with the advent of artificial intelligence and ubiquitous information, that is no longer a massive advantage. And what we need to teach our students is to be like the Renaissance men and have knowledge about various fields, from the arts, the humanities, science and philosophy, literature and poetry, and so on.
Because everything is connected.
Absolutely. I mean, I do a lot of youth talks, and often you interact with students who don't know what they want to do or who don't know what their strengths are, and it's so important to help them find it. But sometimes you meet people who are interested in a lot of things, right? They want to write, they want to act, they want to do science, they want to express themselves through arts, and they often feel like they have to be told, as Rohan pointed out, to specialize, to pick one of those things. You can't possibly do it all. And that's what we're told, and that's what our education systems have been designed for. You traditionally pick either the sciences or the arts or the kind of business track, and then in university you're expected to pick one major or one degree that you focus on. Maybe you take a few extra courses. So we've designed a system that makes people feel like they have to pick one thing. But I encourage all young people, or adults as well, to feel free to do both. Like the whole left brain or right brain myth that you either have to be scientific or an artist is absolute bullshit. So, for lack of a better word.
Well, Raya and Rohan, this has been a most invigorating conversation. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having
Pleasure.
us.